eh. So that's basically how I felt about this movie that I just finished watching an advanced screener for from Netflix. It's coming out on October 6th, and what's today? Today's the 4th. It's not yet tomorrow. I'm getting a head start on things. The name of the movie is There's Someone Inside Your House, and I didn't realize until I started watching it and the credits started to roll in the beginning that this is based on a novel. Seems to have mixed reviews depending on where you go. After watching the movie, I'm not so sure whether I'll check out the book or not, because if it has the same tone as the movie, I feel like it will kind of just be a little bit redundantly annoying. And I'll get into that in a second. I didn't realize also until I started gathering pictures for the review that it's from the producers of Stranger Things and the Conjuring universe. So that was a little surprising. But as far as the movie itself, well, I'll go ahead and explain the premise. Crap, I forgot the main character's name already. Shoot, I'm gonna have to look it up because I forgot her name. Ooh, and it was an unusual name, but it wasn't like something that's crazy out there. It starts with an M. Hold on a second. Okay, her name is Makani. I was wanting to say Michaela, but I knew that wasn't it. Okay, so anyway, the premise of the story is Makani is living in this, I don't remember if the state is, I don't know, like Nebraska. It's like in the smack dab in the middle of the country. They're not close to any beaches or anything like that, because they do make a reference to the beach being like 1,000+ miles away or something like that. But anyway, she is relocated from Hawaii, and you don't know exactly why in the beginning, and then later you do find out what's going on. She's haunted by something from her past that's not revealed to us immediately. It's kind of given to us in layers. We know it has something to do with fire, and that's about it, but we don't know the extent of it until further on into the movie. And she likes this guy who's kind of like the weird guy that people think he's like crazy, but she's keeping it hidden from her friends. It's like she's afraid to own up to the fact that she and this guy like each other. So there's a little bit of teenagey sort of, high school stuff going on with the different likes and dislikes and your typical bullying type stuff that goes on. But it got started off very early on with ticking all of the boxes. All the demographic boxes are ticked, and all of the narrative type boxes are ticked. And you probably, if you've seen enough of my videos, you probably know what I'm talking about. So that was a little bit agitating, because it just felt really over the top with some of the stuff, especially in the beginning. It sort of evened itself out a little bit later, or kind of smoothed out a little bit later on, but it gets started off right away with, your typical white people are homophobic and they're racist, and they're just over the top with it, and this murder happens, and it's kind of tied to a hazing incident involving someone who was gay, and then there's someone who's just very blatantly it's revealed how racist they are, and it's just but some of the way it was carried out just seemed over the top, not subtle at all, and it was almost laughable in some ways. And then different lines that were kind of thrown out here and there, and you're like, well, okay, so they're making these points, that sort of thing. But not taking that into account, which was already, they weren't even, it's like, it kind of reminded me a little, maybe not quite as bad as Candyman, but, reminded me of that type of thing. The insertion of certain things into a story, which if it's done right, it's subtle, makes its point, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's the interesting way to think about it and whatever. But then if it's done wrong, it's clunky, it's too heavy-handed, and it just comes across as obscene and ridiculous. But not counting that, the story itself was decent, it had an interesting killer in it, in that the killer would put a mask, and I'm going to be vague with the killer's identity, obviously. So I'm going to try to make a point to keep my language vague. But when the killer would do their thing and they would go after their victim, they would put a mask on their face that was it was like a 3D printed mask of the victim. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You know, I don't remember that. People have mentioned Leatherface because he made this mask of his victims, but it's not quite the same thing, because this was an actual face of the person that was getting ready to be killed, was the target of the killer. So I thought that was kind of neat. And the filming and the cinematography was very well done. I felt that I really had no complaints as far as that goes. The acting was very decent. The main actress, if I have seen her before, she didn't stick in my head. She did this time now because she's the main character, and I thought she did a really good job. I felt like everyone, for the most part, did a really good job. But where it kind of falls apart-ish for me a bit, and it's not the worst slasher I've seen, and I've made no secret of the fact that, you know, it's hard to do horror right. Most horror sucks. This one suffers from the same sort of typical formulaic thing that happens in horror, which formulaic isn't necessarily a problem, but it's when it's just not handled very smoothly. You know, you had red herrings galore, especially revolving around a specific character. And you know right away when they start throwing out this stuff that's supposed to make you suspicious about a character, you know, well, it's not them, because it's just so obvious. And then there were things I'm wondering if there was stuff that was edited out at the end, because there's an event that happens right before the major climax, the major showdown with the killer. And the main character just suddenly figures out where the killer's going because she saw a poster on the wall, but there's really no way she could have made that, like, why did she make that connection that, oh yeah, the killer, who had previously been targeting individuals, is now suddenly going to go to this particular place where there's a lot of people there and going to target like pretty much everybody. That seemed like such a leap without a good basis for explaining why she somehow figured this out. Maybe it was something that was touched on a little bit better in the book. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to read the book anyway or listen to the book, so whatever. But so, you know, stuff like that. But as a whole, it was decent, but it was just meh. That's kind of how I felt about it. But I mean, I feel like if you're in the mood for a typical horror slasher type of thing, then you probably enjoy watching something like this. I heard this had been screened at some sort of festival in Texas, and I can't remember what the name of it was. Fantastic Fest, maybe? And I was watching a couple of reviews. It was actually a review on one channel, but it was two reviews on a channel. It was like the guy did his own review and then he did a review with somebody else talking about this film, and they mentioned that this was the only film at that festival that got picked up by Netflix. So I found that interesting. I guess everything else that was there that had been screened at the festival probably wasn't very good or whatever, you know, because Netflix seems to want to snap up things that are, you know, higher quality type. They don't always make the best choices, granted, but this just seems like your typical horror stuff and tries to make all these salient points and narratives and you know, typical sort of, not only was there the narrative going on about homophobia and racism, but also and white people bad for the most part, and also rich people, yeah, they're bad, the one percenters, those sort of like, they incorporated language that you often hear when people are having these heated political or social type of debates and stuff, and the catchphrases that were used, and it was just like slapped in there, and it was just okay. Anyway, I don't consider this a waste of my time. I probably won't really watch it again, but I did appreciate the other aspects that I mentioned that went into this. I felt like the scenes were, except for the part where I mentioned where it felt like maybe something had been edited out and there was this leap that made no sense to me. For the most part, I felt like it flowed pretty well, and it didn't feel overly long, and it didn't feel overly short, except for, that other thing I mentioned. I felt like that was handled very well. It was only about like an hour and a half-ish. And this is an example to me of a film that's pretty decently paced, and that it's short-ish runtime. I mean, now we consider 90 minutes kind of short, but it's short-ish runtime, that it was executed well and didn't feel rushed, unlike Venom 2, which was about the same length and felt just insanely too rushed. And so the enjoyment factor, or not necessarily enjoyment factor, because I think I enjoyed, Venom was more fun, but this one felt more satisfying as far as the experience and how the pace of the story, not counting the negatives that I already pointed out. But anyway, so just wanted to do a quick little review about that, and I think I'm going to wrap this up. There's another review I would like to do, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to it today. It's about The Guilty. I reviewed an advanced copy or an advanced screening of The Guilty for Netflix, the American remake. I did that last week, and then the very next day or that night, I started watching the original, and it's so much better. And then I thought about doing a review video for the original, but making it also a comparison type of video where I can maybe touch on different scenes and how the original handled it so much better. But that will require going back through both of those again and picking out the scenes that I want to highlight. So it'll take a bit of time to get that prepared. So I don't know when I'll get around to that, but that was a tangent. And so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up now. Later, guys.